Suzanne.
Well, good morning and welcome to another exciting episode of the Mark and Suzanne Show. I am Mark and she is Suzanne. We're glad you joined us here just a few days away from the celebration of the birth of our Savior, Jesus Christ. I'm glad you joined us here. How you doing, Suzanne? The better half of the Mark and Suzanne Show.
You are too kind. I am delighted to have you back, my friend. I know you were a bit under the weather. You had a dental procedure. You know, that's going to bring in a little topic for some of the medications that they have available for us. I think maybe we have time. We are doing 2 hours today. Greg Carpenter, a.k.a. Junk Bond, will be joining us. Jeff Johnson in the studio, manning the controls, keeping us going. Thank you, Jeff, for all you do for this network. You've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Want to remind you to follow us on Facebook. We have a YouTube channel, Cerberus Radio Network. We have a chat room open right now. We're working on our telephone issues. We're aware that we can't take calls right now, but you can still reach us on the YouTube chat. Send us messages on Facebook. We will see them. We have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN. We have a Facebook radio page as well, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We have a SoundCloud page also. And if you go to our Radio Co app on the network page, you just click that 24/7. We have amazing content, past episodes of the Mark and Suzanne Show, Revolutionizing Radio, the Wasatch Report. Jeff Johnson, one of the founders of the network, just did a new episode or last week of the Paradigm as well. And we also have Greg Carpenter, who will be joining us in a few moments with his shows, Liberty Minutes, that he records ahead of time. They are absolutely fantastic. Mike Meharry podcasts. He's also from the 10th Amendment Center, who graciously, they also publish many of my articles. You know, I got a request yesterday from somebody, I want to let you guys know, that said, I sent them some of my articles and they asked me audio format would be better for me because I access a lot of this from my phone. I'm going to be recording the text of all of my articles, and that way we'll put them up on our pages as well, and you can listen to those and please share them. If you like what you hear on these shows, folks, Facebook is going to be going to paid ads and paid groups. It is up to us to keep this movement organic and share. If you like what you are hearing, tell your friends. This is the only way we are going to grow. We know the people that are running the show and calling the shots in these tech businesses do not like what we have to say. We are not conservative or liberal. We have a common enemy, and that is an illegitimate central government which has stolen the power, stolen powers, never delegated to it by the people of the states, and we're here to help change that. That being said, Mark, I'll let you start carrying on with the show. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you do that so much better than I do. I never can remember all the Facebook pages and stuff, and I used to try to do it back on an old radio show in Maryland, and my good friend, our good friend Joshua Lyons, would always have to clarify what I tried to do. So you do it so much better than I do. When I do stuff like that, I tend to send them to Facebook pages they probably shouldn't be going to and stuff like that. So, well, folks, I'm glad you're here. You know, Suzanne alluded to something there that I think is really important to really begin to get our minds around. This is a movement. It is not just here in the States. It's around the globe. We are in historic times. Now, we always are in historic times from a technical perspective. But when you think about massive societal change, when you think about realignments, when you think about paradigm shifts, folks, we are right at the beginning of a major one. It's coming, and there's no real stopping it at this point. We know that there are all kinds of independence movements all over the world, whether it be most recently in Alberta and Quebec, whether it be a couple of years old in the UK, whether Scotland is now reviving its effort to secede from the United Kingdom, whether it's Catalonia attempting to secede from Spain, whether it's Italy beginning to rattle its sabers about getting free from the EU, whether it's the French Yellow Vest movement. Here in our own country, we've got Cal-Exit, we've got Texit. Folks, there's a building wave out there, and you need not fear this. We need to guide it, and it needs to be guided, to be sure. There's no question there. but you need not fear it. You actually need to participate in it by making good arguments for why central governments are a really, really, really bad idea. We see this in our own experience now, right now. We see this problem. We see a central government that is attempting to make a monolithic America. We're all the same. A couple of days ago, Suzanne and Jeff, I posted on my Facebook page, or I think maybe in our group that we're in, a documentary I watched on the Arapaho and Apache tribes here in Oklahoma. And the program was really about the incidence of type 2 diabetes and how it affects that culture so much. But when you hear it from their perspectives, you know what they trace it to? The white man's food. Now, there's actually physiology behind that. There is a different...
Which isn't even good for the white man, by the way.
Right, exactly. Yours truly. I've learned that. But they blame it there. And this one chief made one statement that I thought was really incredible. He said, and I hadn't ever thought of it this way. He said, you don't have sovereignty unless you have a sovereign control over what you eat. And I thought, you know, there's something to that, because they lived on a diet of buffalo and different kinds of grain, organic types of grain rather than the GMO types grains that we eat now. And they didn't have a diabetic epidemic. They do now, but they're fixing it by going back to their culture, how they understood to live off the land. And in a sense, in doing so, trying to regain their sovereignty. Now, it's a weird path. It's not political. They're trying to say if we can get back control of our cultural diet, that's a step towards regaining our own sovereignty. And folks, you know, if you truly are for the unalienable right to free association, you must respect the rights of the tribes to want to be together themselves. I think this is one of the great problems, even within the quote unquote secessionist movement, that we seem to think we want to secede, but to our way of doing things. And I think we have to be massively careful with how we even understand this idea of peaceful political divorce, secession. It's why I've made the argument, as I have many times here on this broadcast and over many of the times in writings and things like that, that we have to respect diversity. And if we can't, then you're really no different than the sociopaths in Washington, D.C. that are attempting to make a monolithic American. They want to erase heritage. They want to erase ethnicity. They want to erase common languages. They want to erase culture. They want to erase religion. And in the place of all those, they want to erect a new American man. Folks, you must resist that, because we're not the same. It's silly. It's absolutely silly. Why do people like to go to Europe? Because they like to engage the European culture. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. I was with the Japanese and Okinawans for 18 months. I learned so much about their culture, their history, their way of life, and I grew as a person because I had that experience. Why do we want to listen to a bunch of megalomaniac sociopaths in Washington, D.C. that want to make us a common American, where we all share the same supposed American values? Folks, that's just political speak to get you to comply with what they want to do. Don't buy it. Enjoy diversity. I'm telling you, we don't want to fight each other. That's why the group that we are involved in is called Peaceful Political Divorce. We have good friends in California that are involved in the Cal Exit movement, that are trying to secede from the Union. They don't want to attack Arkansas. So when we talk to our good friend Marcus Ruiz Evans, his third point of secession isn't so we can call up the California National Guard and move on Arkansas. You know, guys, the people that think that way, are located in that 10-mile square swampland we affectionately refer to as Washington, D.C.
And Mark, they're also the ones that say they know what the American values are. When they say that's
exactly
who we are, who appointed you to say who we are? Junk Bond has joined us in the discussion. And Mark, I have so much to comment on what you've been saying, but I know Jeff wants to weigh in. So let's give him a chance. And I want to welcome Greg Carpenter to the show as well. Jeff, go ahead. I think you wanted to weigh in on Mark's commentary.
Yes, his whole discussion about these the Apaches and these people and then their diet. You know, I was thinking about that when you're talking about that. Our biggest problem, I think, right now is our processed food. And number one, I am convinced that the high fructose corn syrup is one of the most evil things that was ever perpetrated on the American people. And it's interesting because one of the 10 pillars of communism is the bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of soil in general, and generally in accordance with the common plan. So, you know what? This whole notion of this food and how it's distributed to us and what we are given really is a communist point. They are definitely doing a plan to make the food in such a way that it reaches their goals. And you know what? That's not conspiracy theory. That's exactly what Mark said. So.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that. I mean, I'm now down, just so you all know, I'm down 51 pounds because I got away from the standard American diet. I am much closer to the ground where things are grown than I've ever been. Processed foods are just about eliminated from my diet now, and I'm down 51 pounds. I'm off most medications. And it would have killed me, folks. It almost did. I mean, I wound up in the hospital. It almost killed me.
Yep. Is it possible that the public health doctor can jump in on this discussion about public health?
Please do.
What do you know,
what do you know, Carpenter? You're just a PhD.
I'm glad you asked, Mark. Processed food. So this is a very interesting discussion. I've jumped in on the middle. My apologies, folks. My computer did a mandatory update. It's one of those mandatory government updates, right? Right. Processed food is probably the worst thing you could put into your body. And we now have about 60 years of data that will prove that. Now, back when we first started using and creating processed foods, we didn't have any data to prove how bad it was for you or how poorly it would make your health over time. But Mark, extremely good example, 51 pounds down. I see you probably got 1 pound from trimming a little bit on the beard there.
A little bit.
But the rest of the problem with the processed food is that it has two main types of preservatives in them that are problematic because they don't break down. The reason they're preservatives is they preserve stuff. And good example is you can take bread and put it in the bread drawer of the house and leave it there. So you get Wonder Bread or Giant or whatever it is, doesn't matter. It'll stay for what, week, 2 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks or so. Folks, if you make bread at the house, it's not going to go more than 2 days.
Right.
Because it's naturally going to break down and start to form mold. Mold grows, it lives, it thrives on bread, which has been a problem for years because it's one of the main staples that we have. It would go to pot, per se, very quickly. So,
not in my house, they'll eat it right up.
Preservatives were introduced into bread, and now you have bread that lasts 2.5, 3 weeks. But the preservatives in the bread don't break down. They go into the cells of the body, and they exist in the cytoplasm, the liquid inside of your cells, and it won't break down. It stays there, and it causes problems, specifically with the endoplasmic reticulum and in the mitochondria, the one that processes and the one that is the powerhouse of your cells. And it forces these cells into a state of almost lethargic obesity themselves. Even though they're not fat cells, they can't move, they can't process, they can't do what they're supposed to do. They'll die faster and they'll bloat. Ergo, you have the problem that Mark's talking about.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think this is it, and this is, I think, what they're discovering on these in these tribes, that they did not have the epidemic of diseases that they have now until they, as it is, and it was quite quaint the way they said it. It wasn't antagonistic. It was until we adopted the white man's diet. And now again, they're reverting back to their old form of eating. They're bringing up literally centuries old recipes. There are now chefs here in Oklahoma that are specializing in going back hundreds of years when they roamed the plain states and they ate off of the ground, and they're resurrecting all those recipes, and they're getting healthy, and they're back. They're reducing the incidence of diabetes. It's a fascinating study, but it shows.
Mark, has it helped at all that we don't give them blankets with tuberculosis anymore?
Yeah, exactly right. You know, there's some bad, you know, I'll tell you, this is a corrupt government. Let me tell you, this is at many, many levels throughout all of our history. And you know, more of this is coming out all the time. We're beginning to really see that it's not just us that are beginning to have problems with this idea of central government. It really is a revolt of the little people, if you will, across the globe. And I don't think there's any stopping this, folks. I think it's going to go. I think we're at a moment in history that history will record. Historians will one day write about. It may have very well begun with a bunch of people with yellow vests on, because that is becoming kind of the symbol of rebellion against central authority. And who says central authority is a good idea? Why have we come to embrace that idea? You know, as I push out, and you guys probably see the same thing, as I push out into people's thinking about this, there's almost a natural knee-jerk reaction to say, well, this is the best we have. This is the best since, like, you know, that we've ever created. If you're a Christian, you might quote Romans 13 and say we have to submit to our authorities here. Says who? And God doesn't actually say that in Romans 13. If you understand Romans 13, especially in our form of government, there were times that the apostles rebelled. Certainly in the Old Testament, there were times that the prophets and others rebelled against wicked, evil authority. Well, folks, is this thing not wicked and evil? I mean, look at what's going on. It's why, Suzanne, you know this because you and I have been doing this for quite a while now. It's why I gave up on quote unquote national politics years ago. Who cares? Who cares? There's nothing I can say on this radio program. There's nothing I can type on Facebook. There's no letter I can send to my congressman that matters a hill of beans to them. They are on autopilot of tyranny, and you better figure out how to stop them, not think, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread.
Mark, how responsive do you think the government will be to the claims now in light of the plethora of evidence showing the depravity and the depth of the corruption in the FBI and the DOJ?
Oh.
I mean, this is all they're talking about on the other shows. FISA, the Mueller investigation, yada, yada. But there are no changes coming. I want to go back and address what we started on earlier with regards to the food. You know, when I was driving back and forth to California a lot earlier when we had moved, we had made, because I had kids in the car, a 911 stop to one of those fast food places and got my kid a burger. Well, he didn't eat it. I found it, I think, 3 weeks later in my truck. Exactly the same. Mold doesn't even want to eat that. Imagine what it does sitting in your body. And as you know, we had a television show filmed partly at my house called Yellowstone, and one of the characters, who's a Native American, there were two characters, Native Americans, that were here, and we got to sit and visit and talk. And we had a conversation again about the very things that we started with, getting back to wholesome foods that are not processed, filled with all these chemicals and preservatives. And the American Indians have been smoking tobacco for thousands of years. Yet until the plants and the crops started being sprayed, we never had lung cancer. Smoking is a part of their culture, and they never suffered from lung cancer. Remember now, when we talk about this government, the slaughter of the bisons was one of the key means which, excuse me, they subjugated these people. They thrived on the bison, the meat, and that is still a primary source. What we're learning right now, Mark, and our changes of our diet since I saw you in Dallas. That Sunday was the last day of my life that I was eating the carbs, that I was doing the things I was doing wrong before. I'd already eschewed, the processed foods and the sodas, but I took it up three levels. I personally seceded from the food service. Felt better. And in contravention to how we've evolved, we are seeing these people forced, and us as well, to consume food products that are inherently bad for us. And if you think that this government, going back to the other lies, for instance, about the war against Southern independence, well, the slaves were freed. And if you think that this government was at all motivated by any benefactor motivation for the people of color, look what they did to the people of color after that war was over. They turned the might and force of the United States military against the indigenous people of this continental landmass. Don't think they were motivated by helping anybody that had lesser abilities as they saw it. This was about profiteering. This was about crony capitalism, and it did not start after the death of patron Saint Lincoln.
No, I think you're spot on, and we're beginning to. I think more and more people are beginning to pull the curtain back and understanding who the villain is in this whole drama, because there is a villain here, and the antagonist here is Washington D.C. And Suzanne, this to me and Rick I'm sorry, Dr. Carpenter. I'm going to start calling you that from now on, by the way, because I think I need to elevate your status here on the show, Dr. Carpenter.
Get up his game a little.
Hey, when did you get your PhD, by the way?
What did I get it in, or when did I get it?
When did you get it?
I finished the requirements just about a month ago.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And I just have to do a couple of other research things now, according to the requirements of being an epidemiologist.
Gotcha. Very cool. Very cool.
So it's kind of like doctors have to go and get board certified.
Yeah.
I have to be board and certified. Waterboard, not again, please. I did that in an Army school. That's not fun.
I'm sure it is.
Probably won't kill you, but it's not fun.
Yeah.
Can I just jump one thing here about the McDonald's hamburger?
Yeah.
You know that the McDonald's uses what's classified as a WHO, World Health Organization, toxicity class 1B, highly hazardous material to help.
Jeez. Oh,
it's methaminidose. It's used to treat the potatoes that they use, and McDonald's only uses one type of potato in the world that's highly susceptible to a certain type of potato blight. So they treat it twice. It takes 6.1 days in sand to break down and 309 days in water. So at a standard pH level for water, at 7.0, it takes 27 days. You really have to think about what you're putting into your body.
Yeah, you do.
It's a highly toxic substance, and because McDonald's has a lot of their potatoes grown overseas, they still use this class 1B hazardous material to treat all the potatoes that come into the States and Canada and everything else. It's really it's the cheapest way to do it. And it goes back again to your crony capitalism concept, is that it was outlawed here in the States, but because and that way we can say that we're better than everybody else because we don't use that stuff. But we have it grown in other countries and then shipped here where they do use it. It's just like, having everything shipped to China. And we say, well, our pollution laws are the best. Well, we just shipped everything to China and forced them to be the worst people in the world.
Yeah.
Where does that right? Where does that put like when we put LSD in the water in a small town in France back in the fifth? I was talking about this at my talk at DEF CON when I was in Paris with all the yellow shirts around, and people were looking at me like, "No, this is CIA propaganda." One guy told me that was CIA propaganda you're telling us right now. I'm like, "No, dude." They really did. And everybody in the town went crazy. And the CIA had people there studying the effects of polluting your water, your food, the air, everything with LSD. And people were on extended trips for 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time. And it killed a lot of people and left them with a lot of deformities and other health issues. We did that to you just because we're your friends.
If you have friends like that, who needs enemies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Going back really quick also to the video you were talking about in our peaceful political divorce discussion group. I actually do mean to watch that later today. You don't see or hear the American Indians saying, if we could just get better people in the Department of Indian what do they do right for these people? This last summer I went and camped out actually in the Navajo Nation. We stayed at Monument Valley. And on our way, we exited there, went south into Arizona and got on Interstate 60 to go to Four Corners and into Colorado. And the only two buildings that didn't look like they were falling apart was a government school called the Redskins. That was their mascot was the Redskins, by the way. Oh, and then I got to this gas station to fuel up the RV, and from everywhere, people, Native Americans, American Indians came begging for food. These people are starving. They're in squalor. Right across the street is by far the fanciest building, the newest piece of property that we saw on the entire Navajo Nation. You know what it was? The Department of Indian Affairs.
Naturally, yeah.
Where are the people in this? Where are the people in this building coming out to feed these people? Oh, we're not going to do that, but we'll collect our paychecks at the taxpayers' expense. It's just scandalous how these people.
That's a bad way of looking at this. If you just give them food, they'll never figure out how to live. If you teach them how to farm, then they'll be able to feed themselves every day for the rest of their lives.
They knew how to feed themselves. That's the problem. Oh my goodness!
Well, it's the same stupid comment that you have about the people that take the videos of the kids in Africa. You know, kids in look at poor Johnny here. Johnny's starving to death. Well, give him a sandwich. He's standing right there next to you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, and this can again, I think, gets us heading in the right direction. These kinds of discussions, because who is the villain behind most of this? And I think this is what we're beginning to see occur across the globe. People are beginning to figure out who the villains are here. Now, it took us a long time, but as Jefferson writes in the Declaration, people are very willing to suffer while suffering is tolerable. But at some point, they will right themselves. Now, obviously, for the colonists, it took many, many years. If you take really the first act of what might be considered British oppression back to 1733 in the Molasses Act, the first time the colonists really felt the pain of, we're going to take stuff from you because we can, we're the power. It took another 43 years from that day, from that year, to really get to the point where they said, okay, we suffered enough now. We're going to right the ship here. We're going to right ourselves. I think it's kind of similar what we're seeing here play out right in front of us. People have been willing to go along, and it's like, okay, well, it's not that bad. And maybe things still aren't really all that bad. But I think people are beginning to understand bad is around the corner. Whatever form it takes, bad is coming. And I think what's most important and actually gives me great hope about our future endeavors is that people are beginning finally to identify who the villain is. For years, decades, we've been told the villain is the other party. Whether you're liberal well, the villain are the Republicans. If you're a conservative, well, the villain is the Democrats. And we just fought on that turf forever, for literally as long as I've been alive. That's been the battlefield. Oh, we got to stop Obama. Oh, we got to stop Bush. Oh, we got to stop the conservatives from taking control in Congress. Blah, 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 blah. All that. We got to get, all this stuff. So that has distracted us and insulated the real villain. It's the Wizard of Oz. Who's operating the big bad, voice of Oz? It wasn't a real Oz up there on the screen. It was that, short little guy with a weird haircut behind the curtain. But he was insulated for all those years because the big picture of Oz was projected up on the screen and the voice was deep. And it seemed like, well, that's the guy that's the problem. No, it's this guy behind the curtain. Well, I think I'm seeing, guys, more and more, people are beginning to see, yeah, it's Obama. Yeah, it's Bush. Yeah, they're both part of it. But the real problem are the sociopaths and the form of government that we have emanating from that 10-mile square swampland we call Washington, D.C. And you guys, as soon as a large number of people figure that out, and that number grows daily, if you ask me.
And what we see is the narrative. If you try and go to any of the mainstream sources, I don't care if it's on your satellite, your cable, or go to Sirius XM Patriot, and you can listen to them go back and forth about Mueller and the Russians and the Democrats all day long. Same thing, just different people saying it. They all identify it to the extent that they say the government is wrong. It's only to the extent that the other party is doing things that are wrong. How can we possibly solve the problems we have now when the solutions emanate from Washington, D.C.,
right?
Particularly when the problems have arisen because this government has grabbed powers never delegated to it in the first place. Why? We have now, people are talking about a recession because the feds are raising interest rates, but everybody's focused on the wall. Mm-hmm. Where is the constitutional authority? And these are the constitutionalists on Conservative Talk Radio. Where is the constitutional authority for this wall? Well, constitutionally, the president has the obligation to enforce and build this wall. It's not there.
No.
People don't understand the indoctrination and the Lincolnian version of these United States is now this United State. Of course, now, if you look at it in that paradigm, the president absolutely has the obligation to shut down the border and build a wall.
14th Amendment.
Yes.
That's the answer to everything.
And these problems come about because the federal government, the national government, pardon my French, but we have to use the N-word here. It is not a federal government. Has made it mandatory that schools in every state in this union have to educate the children of those who come here illegally at the public expense. You go to any Social Security office and you find posters and literature all over the place, primarily in Spanish, but in every other language as well, of how to collect your free benefits. These benefits follow you no matter where you go. You can get them. And this is what I tried to explain to people in our article published by the 10th Amendment Center, the constitutional solution to immigration. The states themselves were the ones that retained the power for themselves to determine who was going to reside within their sovereign territorial borders. That's not the same as naturalization, a path to United States citizenship. Congress has, under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, the power to come up with uniform rules for this, but that's not the same as who's going to live within the borders. That's a social policy consideration left for the state. So California, who wants to have their open borders, can do so provided they are fiscally responsible for their policies within their states. But as long as we have, for instance, we just saw what just happened because we have Medicaid with funds being commingled, state funds and federal funds, what just happened? The Supreme Court, the Black Robe Messiahs, we just need one. We got to vote for Trump because we need another guy on our side so we can finally get rid of abortion. They refused to even entertain the notion that perhaps we should not be funding abortions and Planned Parenthood. This was supposed to be the reason to vote for President Donald Trump, because his Black Robe Messiah was going to put an end to this. What happened with that, Mark?
Well, it didn't. That's not what happened. And this is why as we've talked many times before, this is why I don't even bother myself with constitutional arguments other than to say, it's laughable to say there's anything remotely close to the Constitution governing or guiding this government. This government is an untethered from any restraint government. It is truly, if there's lawlessness, it's in the 10-mile square swampland called Washington, D.C. That is a lawless enterprise there.
You even give it, Mark, the 10-mile square. It's about half of that, right?
Right. It really is. Right. But I'm just quoting from the Constitution.
They can get so much more worse stuff out of something 10 mile by 5 mile. Can you imagine if it was actually 10 by 10, if they pumped everything in there?
Don't make me have to even think about that. But I think this is it. When we can get to the point to realize we're not lawless in thinking the way we think, they're the lawless ones. Right. Now we can get to a position to really, and what I've done and my hope to be soon published book, if I can get my life squared away here, this is when you can begin to apply the scientific method and come up with the ultimate answer to all the problems we face. The hypothesis that was proffered in 1787, that the foundational governing principles that came out of the Declaration of Independence could be codified in a constitution, and that constitution, divided among 3 co-equal branches of government, would protect unalienable rights, failed. It just failed. And so, Greg, you're a scientist. What do scientists do when their experiments, when their hypothesis fails? Do they just say, we're going to keep at it until we can prove it succeeds?
That's
or do they do the mature?
Blew up. What do we do now?
Yeah. Do they do the mature thing, step back and say, oh, perhaps our hypothesis was wrong?
No, what I've seen a lot of in recent years, which is kind of scary, is that they'll say, oh, well, we couldn't prove our hypothesis. Well, how can we reassess the data in a way that will actually support the hypothesis that we want it to be? There's proper ways and improper ways of analyzing data, and a lot of people choose to improperly analyze the data and say it's a success. So in this situation, people look at what we tried to do years ago and say, well, Lincoln proved it all right. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not the way to analyze your data correctly.
Right.
You have to look at what you have, collect data over time, and then look for the incongruencies and the differences, and then see what worked and what didn't work according to the base premise, the hypothesis, and conversely, the contrapositive of the null hypothesis, the exact opposite, to see if that worked. So really, we're not looking at this correctly at all. And I think that we're stuck in a game. People are, and I don't think anybody here is going to disagree with me, but people are more dumbed down now than they were when they didn't have education years ago and could speak Latin in 8th grade.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Now we have remedial English in college just to help everybody. And I want to go back to the Wizard of Oz analogy, right? When Frank Morgan was hiding behind the curtain, King Vidor, who was the final director, there's like 5 or 6 directors of the Wizard of Oz. King Vidor did the finalized part of it, and he made the wizard, the appearance of the wizard, much bigger than originally planned by Victor Fleming when he did the work when they first did the shots. And the comparison of where Frank Morgan was inside of his little booth, much, much smaller, to give the, to really highlight the difference in the fact that Frank Morgan was just a really little guy, a broken, failed wizard who's controlling all of this stuff. And we're caught in this same psychological disparity. It's called binary opposition. The Republicans are good, the Democrats are bad. The Republican ideals and ideas are good, the Democrat ideas and ideals are bad. And if we're and we would have to be Republicans because our stuff is good. If we were Democrats, the converse would be true. It's a psychology game that these people together collectively are playing with us. And this is what makes up a binary opposition, is that Republicans and Democrats work together to give the appearance that one is better than the other, to build up the numbers collectively of Republicans and Democrats and keep them away from anything that would disrupt the collective power of the two. We look at it as Republican-controlled Congress, Democrat-controlled Congress, period. No, it's megalomaniac-controlled Congress.
Yes, exactly right. That's exactly right.
I had a friend contact me the morning after we, quote, lost the house. I don't know what to do. This is just awful. I said, nothing's changed.
Did you show them where to find the house?
Yeah.
It's in the same spot where you left it.
Yeah.
Down. And, here's the thing, too. We get so caught up again in what you call the binary opposition, this Democrat-Republican paradigm. If you hear even how the truth has been so successfully obfuscated, I was listening to Andrew Wilkow a while back when I had the Sirius XM satellite. Now I just listen to music. I don't even bother. But this was in reference to the statues being torn down of the Confederate heroes, General Lee, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and so on. And his response, go ahead, take down the statues of Democrats. I thought, really, Andrew? He used to be more along the lines of Mike Church. Now he's gone full-blown Levin. And I guess it's top security. But to say that this is just statues honoring Democrats is such a dumbed-down version of American history, because these were the Jeffersonians. These were the people advocating limited government, a general government only with the powers delegated to it. Those that went beyond those laws were null. They were without legal effect. Think nullification. These people were the voices that showed secession was legal. It is still legal. It is still the only way out of what we are seeing today is a collapse. Civil war is being talked about, but no, we're just going to say, yeah, go ahead, take down the memories of Democrats. This is the problem that we have to overcome, is the overwhelming majority, unfortunately, of people turn to these media pundits. It's very easy just to put on your radio in your car or the television in your home. You have to take a few extra steps to get to us. And it's not helped by the fact that the wizards over in Silicon Valley are trying to keep our message hidden as much as they possibly can as well. We have a huge obstacle ahead of us to get our message out there. But when people are starting to come across it, they're saying, you know what? I really like this solution. When we put our message on Facebook yesterday, a friend of mine said, I saw your invitation to listen. I can't wait to hear more. We've got to get that message out. That's why I implore our followers. You like what we're saying, share it, because the tech giants ain't on our side. They're not going to help us.
I think it's really important. We identify the problem well. I think we also have to paint a future that says what is better than this, because I think this is a total train wreck. I think there's no reason to think there's anything redemptive. In fact, I would never myself personally ever advocate for a general central government again. I think they're really bad ideas. And because they do naturally what they do, which is draw parasites. to them. They draw sociopaths to them. There's something weird. There's a subset of our population, folks, and if you don't believe this, just look what's going on right now. There's some small percentage of our population that really do have a sociopathology. They really do like power. They usually are accompanied by some kind of charisma. We might refer to it as narcissism, but they enjoy the rush, the thrill of ruling other people. They love to self-aggrandize. And so when you've got stop and think about this for a minute, $4 trillion flowing through one city every year. And you're a committee chairman and you have great deal of control over all that money, a large portion of that money. It goes to your heads, folks. I was there. I'm the guy on the show here in the network that worked on Capitol Hill as a senior legislative assistant. I know what it did to me. Here I am, an evangelical born-again Christian, and I'm screwing around with power I don't have the authority to deal with. I wasn't elected to cast votes, but because so many votes are going through, why do you hire senior legislative assistants? To keep track of all the legislation going on so you can figure out what's the best vote for re-election. Folks, it's totally bad. So I want to offer a solution going forward, because I think that is how we have to look now. We have to say, what is a better way? Are there examples in history that we can look at and say that this form of government blocks to some degree the sociopaths from getting power? Because you got to understand, the sociopaths are always going to be with us until such a point as Jesus returns and closes down human history. The sociopaths are going to be there. Now, if we start with that premise, now it's up to us to say, well, what's a better way to stop them from getting political power? The only way, and this has been conversations that I've had over the years with friends like Marshall DeRosa and other scholars, you have to understand a homogeneous society and a heterogeneous society. You have to understand scale. What is the proper size of a properly functioning society? I'm telling you 100% certainty. 320 million people governed by 545 megalomaniacs is a really, really bad idea. I don't care about their intentions. In 1787, I could care less about their intentions, what they were trying to do. What we have today is 545 megalomaniacs trying to rule 320 million people. That's a stupid idea. And so I don't care about what we have now. I care about what should we do going forward, because if we don't look forward, we're just going to get stuck arguing the past, and we're going to get stuck arguing, like we've been talking about this morning, right versus left. Break the paradigm in your thinking. Begin to explore in your own mind what is a better way. Now, Aristotle and Plato would suggest small republics. There have been small republics throughout history. Sometimes they've survived massive imperialism by Spain and France. So you've got the Italian duchies, who survived quite a long time as small little republics. Right now, we've got the Swiss cantons. We've got the Swiss model. They're generally small republics within the construct of a country called Switzerland.
You know, Mark, when you mentioned Switzerland, and I've used that in arguments as well, and I actually got a response saying, nobody cares about Switzerland. I said, that's my point.
That's the point. That's the point. Yes, yes.
But you know what? Going back to your hypothesis, unfortunately, what is viewed as success is global domination. The mighty of the American military force and presence. And this is going back to the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. We have decided that we are the police of the entire global community. And then anybody that we elect as president is going to be, and we've heard this all the time, the leader of the free world. What kind of megalomania would possibly seek such responsibility, knowing
That's Frank Morgan.
knowing as they should, that this is in direct contravention to what was supposed to be their power and authority under Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States. Again, I voted for Donald Trump because I just find Hillary Clinton so personally reprehensible, and that would have been the case even if their party labels were switched. It doesn't really matter, but imagine how angry they are now. This was her time. She was supposed to win. We saw the temper tantrums as soon as the elections were called, the rise of Antifa, all these protests, the resist movement. This is completely unnecessary. Now look at the language. For instance, when the Democrats got the House back of Maxine Waters and the vindictive tone. Now that she is going to be a woman who's dumb as a box of rocks, the head of our House Finance Committee, they're gonna pay for what they've done. She is being punitive. She does not want to work on behalf of making anything better for the American people. The markets are responding accordingly. And what's going to happen if Donald Trump loses and a Democrat wins that White House? They're going to double down on what they couldn't done and make us pay because their gal didn't win. She was supposed to be, I think, 90% assured of this victory. This was unprecedented, this loss, and they are not happy. They're going to make us pay. How do we avoid this? Strip them of their power and start doing it before it's too late. I'm not a fan of Ann Coulter, but I think it was she that said that Donald Trump will be the last Republican, whatever that means, president that we ever have. This is only going to get worse. The only way we can avoid this is by walking away from this government. If there are states that want to be marching goose step with them, let them stay, but we can leave. I wanted to be very clear that we are not advocating revolution. I have one follower on my Facebook page just says, please don't start a revolution during my lifetime. I'm just too tired. You know, just that is just such a defeatist language here. Nobody's talking about a revolution. In fact, our war for independence, the original one, wasn't even a revolutionary war. There was nothing revolutionary about seeking to go back to the conservative values of principles such as consent of the government, limited government authority. So, there's nothing revolutionary about this. This is a matter of consent of the governed and just going back to natural common decency and our basic pre-existing rights.
And so let's begin to imagine. Let's begin to dream. And this is where you just have to make yourself dream. We're seeing this happen right now, play out in front of us in Brexit. They're going through the very negotiations that we need to go through. Now, I have talked for years about peaceful political divorce, the idea of peaceful secession, separating the union, however you want to describe it. The current situation in England is exactly representative of how it's likely to go. Peaceful doesn't mean tension-free. Of course it's going to be filled with tension. But let's say tomorrow, 14 states that I've identified, starting in Oklahoma, heading east out to South Carolina, up into West Virginia, and a few other places, 14 states, they decided by convention. And by the way, this is not a legal process, folks. Secession is uniquely a political process. It is the expression of the will of the people, the only true sovereigns in this form of government. Do not buy the idea that Washington, D.C. has some kind of unique sovereignty and it governs independent of the people. The people have all the power. You have all the power. So I'm not appealing to Washington to let us go. I'm not going to do any of that. That's demeaning. That's paternalistic. I'm not ever going to go to them and say, oh, will you let us go? No. Secession is a determination of the people. And the exact example of that happened on June 23rd, 2016. in our cousins over there in the UK. They took a vote and said, we are gone. They didn't go to Brussels and say, oh, within this agreement, will you let us go? No, they exercised a clause, Article 50, and said, we are gone. Now comes what we're seeing. Exactly. The unfolding of negotiations. How does all this unwind? How do all these tentacles that the EU had planted into the UK, how do they get untangled? Well, that takes sitting down at tables and saying, this tentacle is here. We don't want it here, or maybe we want some of it here. But that's how this goes, folks. Do not instantaneously jump to the idea that the fourth ID is going to come rolling across Kentucky's borders and start launching salvo after salvo into Arkansas to force us to just knock it off. That's not going to happen. We are going to do exactly what's happened in Brexit. 14 states are going to, in convention of the people, not asking Washington for permission, not appealing to some constitutional provision, not talking about Texas v. White, not going to the Supreme Court and saying, we want to make an exquisite argument to be free. They are just going to say, we are free, and now you're going to deal with it. Now, you can deal with it and attack us, but we've got tanks too. We've got National Guards too. So if you want to just have this mano-a-mano explosion where we launch our F-16s at your F-16s based on our Alabama National Guard and your former U.S., we got the same equipment. If you want that, then I guess that's where we go.
And we hear that all the time. We hear that all the time. We're going to continue this after the break. We're going to break in about 30 seconds. We have a bonus hour for you. We had so much fun talking, and with Mark here today, we decided we're gonna do a whole 2 hours because people really enjoyed our free flowing format that we had. We're gonna continue this discussion. I'm gonna clear up a little things about Texas v. White. We're gonna talk a little bit about how we can do this peacefully. Mark will tell us about the already successful peaceful secessions that we've had. No, it can be done. We're gonna go to a quick break, and this is the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We'll be right back.
Citizens, soldiers, I am here at the order of General Robert E. Lee, commanding all Virginia forces. On April 15th of this year of our Lord, 1861, Simon Cameron, the Secretary of War of the United States, sent a telegram to our Governor, John Letcher, directing him to raise 3 regiments of infantry to be sent to assist in suppressing the Southern Confederacy. Governor Letcher's answer is well known to you, but perhaps not his words. His wire to Washington stated, "You have chosen to inaugurate civil war. And having done so, we will meet you in a spirit as determined as the Lincoln administration has exhibited toward the South." 2 days later, the Virginia legislature voted for secession. Just as we would not send any of our soldiers to march in other states and tyrannize other people, so will we never allow the armies of others to march into our state and tyrannize our people. Like many of you, indeed most of you, I've always been a Union man. It is not with joy or with a light heart that many of us have welcomed secession. Had our neighbors to the north practiced the less bellicose form of persuasion, perhaps this day might not have come, but that day has been thrust upon us like it was thrust upon our ancestors. The Lincoln administration required us to raise 3 regiments. Tell them we have done so.
Cerberus Radio Network, protecting liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.
Welcome back to the Mark and Suzanne show. I am Mark. She is Suzanne, and we're joined also here by our good friend, Dr. Greg Carpenter. And we're glad you joined us for hour 2 of the Mark and Suzanne show. We're having a very lively conversation. And if you joined us, you know exactly what we're talking about. So we're glad you're here with us, and we'll pick up where we left off. Suzanne, I know you wanted to jump into Texas v. White a little bit.
Yeah, and that was a great segment that Jeff played on the break, too, because that really illustrates. And thank you, Robin. Our good friend Robin is listening, saying this is a lively talk. You can reach out to us on Facebook. Thank you, folks, for the second hour. It took me 35 minutes to share the link today. Facebook kept shutting down. That's from Jeff. That's a follow-up on what we were warning. But, yes, going back to Robert E. Lee, when I was taking a tour through Arlington, the bus driver, who probably wasn't hired because he was a noted historian, as we passed, he mentioned Robert E. Lee and referred to him as a defector. Now, in the segment that Jeff played during the break, he mentioned a foreign army coming through the state of Virginia. The state of Virginia, he was asked to be the head of the Union Army by Abraham Lincoln, and he declined because he did not want to wage war on his own country, his country of Virginia. Folks, that is not being a defector. So again, the message is so brilliantly hidden. We have mainstream media pundits calling these people Democrats and making them seem like they are the same party of Democrats that we have today. They don't really understand that the parties have essentially switched names, because there is nothing conservative about expanding the government and subverting our federalist system that we had. So don't pay attention to the names of the parties and support the destruction of our history that eschewed central government, because the pundits are illiterate when it comes to history. They just don't understand this. Tune into us, listen, and I think, Jeff, you were wanting to chime in from the last break. It's hard to get a word in edgewise with us.
Yes, it is at times. Today we were discussing an article, Mark, and we were hoping you'd join in, but you were still busy. We talked about an article from the 10th Amendment Center called Texas Bullion Depository Begins Construction. And I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs of it. Texas, December 17, 2018. Last week, officials broke ground for construction of the Texas Bullion Depository Building. The creation of the facility represents a power shift away from the federal government and sets the foundation to undermine the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money. I'm going to read the last paragraph. The Texas Bullion Depository creates a mechanism to challenge the federal government's monopoly on money and provides a blueprint for other states to follow. If the majority of states control their own supply of gold and people began using precious metals in daily transaction, it could conceivably make the Federal Reserve completely irrelevant. And so we're talking about trying to make solutions. We're still, even if we can't get the solution right now, secession, here is a state practicing a form of secession. They're seceding from the federal government's stranglehold on fiat currency. And I just wanted to get your take on that whole idea.
Hey, any move a state makes to untangle itself from the web of Washington, D.C. is a good move. I don't see it. I mean, there may always be the potential of downsides to this, but I'd rather deal with those downsides that can come, and we have the freedom to deal with the downsides than what we have right now, where we have no power to do anything. So anytime a state makes a move anyway to get away from the entanglement with Washington, D.C., I applaud, absolutely applaud. And there's going to come a point. Currency obviously is a big part of independence, because we've been tricked into believing the only way we can survive is with the Federal Reserve. Well, yeah, if you want to survive on borrowed money from your children and grandchildren, I guess it's a great idea. Then jump right on and rob your grandchildren and children for more. But this is an issue that is going to have to be dealt with. Is what is the vehicle that's going to be used to transact commerce and trade in states that secede? But yes, to your point, Jeff, to your question, I think anytime a state makes a move to untangle itself from Washington. It is a step in the absolute right direction, and I'm seeing more and more of this. And so, just real briefly, I think this is why this is such an important discussion, because I think our natural urge is to think this has to be done through kind of an elected body. It really doesn't. It begins exactly with this network, not just this network, but it begins with these kinds of conversations. Because at the end of the day, the people must make this move. It is not your elected sociopaths that do it. Now, they may factor in, but kind of towards the very end of the move of the people. So we've got to get the order right. If we don't get the order right, then we're never going to be successful. And what I'm seeing is more and more people are coming to realize that the problem is Washington, D.C. They don't think they have any power right now because in a real sense, they have very little. They have some, but they have very little. But this is where social media, this is where the internet is breaking down the walls they used to erect to stop all this. They can no longer totally propagandize. And certainly as my generation, the baby boom generation, exits stage right and goes into eternity, the Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Zers behind are very capable when it comes to technology and using it to get their news, to connect with different communities, to organize, very adept at it. So as every year goes by, a certain number of hundreds of thousands of my generation that still is nostalgically hoping for the resurrection of Lassie and maybe RFD as a way of life, as they exit stage right and the Gen Xers take over, this organization is happening right now. It's happening. As the organization develops and the movement develops, people will begin to feel empowered. And you know what else is going to happen? Washington, D.C. is going to feel threatened. They're going to get afraid. They're going to become fearful. Now, they will have, they're not stupid. They're going to try to hold on to power as long as they can. These are very clever people there. They are going to try to hold on to it. They'll use threats. They'll use hints of threats. They'll use hints of force and all these kinds of things to try to scare. And from time to time, we have to admit they'll be very successful at it. They will scare people. They will do things that are publicly, they will try to embarrass people and key people. That's why you got to have many, many leaders in a movement like this. It can't be just one. And they will try to counter the movement. Look what happened over in France just over a few short weekends. They essentially gutted Macron over there. And he ended up backtracking. Now it was a kind of a clever backtracking, and it was a temporary one. We'll see if he comes back around and tries it again. But you get to see what happens when the people are organized and mobilized. They can actually bring about serious change. Let's go to Lithuania in 1991. The people in that tiny, tiny, tiny little republic, tiny, took on the Soviet Union. Don't think for a minute Gorbachev didn't want to mow down a few, tens of thousands of Lithuanians, but Boris Yeltsin was there saying, no, we're not going to mow down. And so this kind of people emerged that you wouldn't maybe have predicted would have emerged. And we can't foretell all the things will emerge in our independence movement. So there's plenty of history on this, folks. What is important right now, we are at the very earliest of phases of beginning to organize a movement. You got to begin to think. Don't worry about Washington and don't worry about this existing form of government. If this is successful, you won't be living under this form of government anymore. If this happens, now I'm almost 60 and maybe I won't live to see it. I hope I get to see it. But if I don't, I don't. But I want my children and grandchildren to live in a freer country. We're at the very beginning of it. Just free your mind of fear. Begin to imagine better ways forward. Imagine a new convention of 12 states, and they're saying, what does our Commonwealth look like? our Commonwealth, not all 50 states, these 12 states. What does that Commonwealth look like? What kind of government do we want to have there? Let your mind go there. You cannot win if you think you can take over Washington or persuade the Supreme, as Suzanne calls them, the Black Robe Messiahs, or is that what you call them?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not going to win. It's just total futility. If you think that's the solution, stop paying attention to politics and move over to your favorite sports team, because you're going to get more enjoyment out of life following the Oklahoma City Thunder than the machinations at the Supreme Court or in Congress.
Mark, you made a really I don't think I'll let you in just 1 second, Greg. You made a point about future generations and the baby boomers. This may or may not happen in our lifetime, but therein lies the difference between what we're trying to do and what that follower on my Facebook said. No, I'm just tired. I don't have time for this. I'm not going to live for it anyway. So, the heck with the future generations. What did Thomas Jefferson say? It was absolutely immoral for one generation to bind future generations to their debts and their policies. We're trying to go back to these founding principles that, those that are our progeny should not be burdened by these mistakes. There's no going back and getting back to the Constitution, fixing everything in Washington, D.C. Let me ask you this, Mark. Every time you got a letter from a constituent, tell me how much time you spent with your boss going over the concerns expressed in each letter. We don't even have to answer. I know the answer is 0.
No, that's not true. We spent hours. Every letter that came in, I ran into the congressman's office and I said, Congressman Baker, we've got it. You have to address this issue from this constituent. People only knew.
Coffee up my nose. But, we have to talk about these future generations, because we are going to be dying off. And that's a great waiting game, because if we just do a waiting game, keep voting, hoping, coping, changing Washington, D.C., getting back to the Constitution, the people that believe the way we do are going to die off. Mm-hmm. The public education system has a stranglehold on philosophical ideologies of self-reliance, limited government. We have a generation, a society where an 11-year-old boy is dressed up like a drag queen, and the media says this is brilliant. We have drag queens in our education system saying you can be any gender you want. Now try and reconcile that with this creation, this creation of generations of a genderless society. Masculinity is toxic. Boys are glorified for dressing like women. But at the same time, we have a bloodthirsty government. Who's going to fight these wars they keep getting in? Maybe that's a good thing that they want. Maybe they won't be able to get people qualified to fight these wars. Maybe that's the one way out of it. That's better way out of it is by personally seceding. You can do this at your family level from the public education system. Do not even expose your kids to this garbage. Teach them the right way. The other day I was doing a show and I found myself really stumbling over this diatribe I was trying to get into about what the public education should be teaching. Because I said, why are they teaching these kids about climate change, about all this socialism, social justice warrior crap? They should be teaching auto mechanics, no. And I'm sitting there, no, they actually shouldn't be teaching that either. That's something for the families to teach. Get your kids out of these school systems. They are not about your families. They're not about educating them. They are about creating future drones that are loyal to this regime. Get out of it. That is a step. That's something that you can do. Yeah. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Give a lawyer a boys and girls.
He was striking that.
Boys and girls, we want you to understand that this is what happens when you give the lawyer the opportunity to say, I'll let you talk in a minute. Mark, my question
later.
Hey, Mark, you couldn't even get on your own show that time. I was filling it for you.
I went, shaved, got a cup of coffee, and came back.
Car washed.
Oh, no, I didn't have time for the car wash. Don't be silly.
Okay.
So, Mark, the thing that has really interested me quite a bit is that in England, prior to the colonies separating, their constitution was mostly a verbal constitution. And then here we put together and implemented a written constitution. Now, they adhere to their verbal constitution, and we do not adhere to our written constitution. A verbal constitution is something that's much easier to change and to work with, and a written constitution, it would seem, would be much more difficult to change and work with. What do you think would be the best way to go forward if there is some type of separation of the states from the federal government? Do you think that it would be best to have some type of a combination constitution, or a more federated approach than what we are currently looking at with mandatory divisions?
I think
Something
that's
like that.
These are the questions I think I would love to spend hours talking about this, because I think when we get into this kind of discussion, now the best of us can come forward. We can begin to think, wow, we can begin to imagine a better way. So I envision, Greg, a wide variety of forms of government. Now, if we can get the scale right, this has been Don Livingston's argument since 1993, I think. If we can get the scale right, then there can be a wide range of various types of approaches to government, because it will only affect that small republic. And so I can envision a Christian republic that codifies its organizing structure, its governmental structure, from something they source in the scriptures. They may create a totally biblical government. Totally fine. I can imagine Marcus Ruiz Evans out there in California perhaps having a government that is has many birth to death social safety net programs, and I'm totally fine with that. So in my personal opinion, I would want to live in a system of government that really has a more of a minarchy approach to it, a night watchman approach to it, where the only government that is there are courts in order to resolve contract disputes and put bad guys out of the society that's hurting people, and then some kind of a police force that actually arrests the bad guys, the rapists, the murderers, and the thieves. That's all I want as government. I don't want government to do anything else. Now, let's say there's 3,108 counties in America. Now, we're talking scale here. Maybe that is the model we look at and say, because we got proper scale, we got a small enough community of people that they can actually understand consent to the governed in that small of a state, if you will, or a nation. So there's 3,108 nations in America. Just by fiat, I wave a wand and Washington's gone, and state borders are gone, and county borders matter. Well, now suddenly I have a lot more control. I have a lot more power because I'm in a small county. Scale is right. Imagine if 25% of them are, night watchman type states, and they have very little government. I'm going there. That's where I'm going. Imagine if 25% of them are Christian republics, and they are happy as clams to be governing themselves that way. And then you've got the leftists. Well, you've decentralized power. There's not just a small group of people that control everything. There's a small group of people in a small group of people. And that small group of people can get to that small group of people that's running them a lot easier than we can now. So if they go haywire, you can literally march in there and say, you're out. You get enough people. So I think Don Livingston has always been on to the real solution to all of this. He is a genius. He has always understood, and he and Kirkpatrick Sale, that it's always been about scale. The problem is We're way too big to be governed by what happens with the megalomaniacs. We're way too big for that. We've got to distill it down. And then, Greg, to your question, I think we're going to have a whole host of governments out there, and I'm fine with that. Some will confederate with each other, will commonwealth with each other for mutual agreement. There may be all 3,108 confederate with each other to protect borders. All kinds of things. Those kinds of discussions.
Who says all of them have to agree on everything, right?
Exactly. This has been the problem of the monolithic American, the sociopaths. I tried to buy a bottle
of scotch online from a company that I normally buy scotch from, and I felt a little bit of my freedom pulled away from me because the federal government implemented a tax that it taxes the states, and so the states in turn tax the people, or tax the companies that are shipping the scotch, so that every state that the scotch goes through, there's a tax as it passes each border now. So 6 of the 8 online companies that I used to purchase from now no longer ship in the States because it's way too expensive for their customers. They gave up.
Yay, government.
Our good friend Dwayne Stovall talks about scale a lot. And one of the examples he gave was, imagine the people of Barcelona, Spain, actually tolerating people in Moscow dictating what kind of curriculum they're going to be teaching their children. We have accepted, because of the disintegration of the state's borders, other than if you're traveling and you see the welcome to Utah or welcome to Wyoming, politically, it's all one big blob. We have become acceptant of the fact that out here in my little town of Colville, Utah, Washington, D.C. has a say in what these kids are being taught. Or here, when I had my dogs, when they were alive, I had these geriatric dogs that I didn't want to have to haul to the nearest veterinarian for an hour, call them up. Before, it's like they would drop medications off at the feed store. I run down the hill, I get what I need. I called in. I said, yeah, my dog's got some worms. It's very common out here. They get into the game leftovers. And they said, oh, I see your dog hasn't been here for 2 years. We'd be happy to drop off the medication at your local feed store, but the federal government says we can't. Jeez. I'm in the mountains. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And somehow some clown in Washington, D.C. have the time to come up with the rule that unless your pet has been seen within 2 years, the veterinarian cannot prescribe you medicines that you know your animal can need and will benefit from. And we talk about a government shutdown that they will only keep, that they'll only shut down the non-essential employees. I submit to you, 95% of this government is non-essential. And all of a sudden, Trump, who was saying at the first time he signed that disaster of an omnibus bill, I'm not going to do it again. We've got to fund our military. Then he did it again. I'm keeping the government open. Now what happened? Mitch McDonald just put it again, as you mentioned earlier. Well, we'll deal with this later. Meanwhile, our debt has gone up. What is it? It is up $1.33 trillion in the last 12 months. How is that any kind of a change from a populist president? Go ahead, Greg.
The change is that the debt increases more than a populist president.
Yeah.
Under your conservative president, right? You've increased your debt a lot faster, and that's because he's conserving all of the liberal and social programs that are illegally put into place.
Yes. No, this is, and I think this is why we've got to move to a future vision. I think one of the great problems we lack right now is leadership on this issue. We have nobody who's saying really of any stature beyond us and others. I think you know what I mean. That we don't have people envisioning people that there's a better way. People are still kind of stuck. But that said, there are leaders emerging who are saying there is a better way forward. And I think as more and more of those people emerge, we're going to continue to see this thing shift. I am not hopeless at all. In fact, I'm very hopeful with what I'm seeing on the ground. Back in the 1500s, there was a famous English philosopher named Thomas Hobbes who argued this idea that man, in a state of nature was poor, brutish, and ugly, and we're just always going to be attacking each other ourselves. And so therefore we need this thing called government, made up of a special group of people that would stop us from being poor and brutish and ugly towards each other and wanting to murder, rape, and pillage each other.
Now our government has the exclusive on that.
Yeah, we've adopted this idea that we need this special group of people. We call them in our country elected officials. Now, we don't have people yet. We don't have people of high visible stature yet saying we don't need this special group of people. When they emerge and they get microphones and they get TV cameras and they get seminars and conventions, and they begin to say, Ron Paul was probably the closest we've had in our lifetimes to being that person to saying, we don't actually need these special group of people. We don't need them. Because the reality is you and I conduct our daily lives peacefully, voluntarily transacting with people all day without government making that happen. In other words, we don't do it because government's there. We don't have peaceful voluntary transactions. Oh, the only reason I don't murder the 7-Eleven clerk is because I know government's there. I don't walk into any store ever and say, you know what? If government wasn't here, I would slash that guy's throat. I don't think that way.
Even when they're out of coffee, I don't think that.
That's right. And you know what? Everybody in the listening audience doesn't think that way either. And everybody I know doesn't think that way. But the special group of people want us to believe, like Hobbes, that without the special group of people, you're going to slash that guy's throat, because in a state of nature, man not controlled by government, they are poor, brutish, ugly, murderous, raping thieves. That's not true. That is a lie. Now, I get where it comes from, and I understand Hobbesian thought, and I get all that. That was in the 1500s. We have evolved to the 21st century. We're actually smarter than we were. I don't recall them having air conditioners in the 1500s because they weren't smart enough yet to figure out how to do it. They made fans to cool themselves down. So all these advances that we have seen since Hobbes penned this idea must take us back to those concepts that still haunt us today and say, do we need those anymore? And I'm saying, I'm making the argument, no, we don't need this special group of people. As I said earlier, in my republic that I would like to live in, I want judges there who have some measure of objectivity, who can say, contract A was presented to me, party A and party B are in conflict over the words of this contract. I've read the entire contract. I now am prepared to rule. Party B, you violated Clause 4, Section 2A. You owe Party A $22,000. But whatever. That's what I want judges there to do. I want them to say, you were arrested for murdering Joe Smith out of anger, whatever. I hereby sentence you out of the community somewhere for some period of time. And that's it. That's what I want. That's all. I don't want them to build roads. I don't want them to build public schools. I don't want public libraries. I don't want social safety nets. I don't want FDA regulating the medicines. I don't want any of that. Number one, all of that can be done privately if we need it, for a profit, for companies that want to do it and make a living doing it, like Underwriters Laboratories.
The argument I hear against that, well, the companies aren't doing it. You know why they're not? Because they don't get an opportunity to.
Right. They got
look at the bureaucratic mountain they have to climb called the FDA to get something that's beneficial approved. Then there are compounds out there in the form of plants that are very beneficial to a multitude of maladies, but they can't exactly patent that, or there actually is a patent for a synthetic version that would cost, I think it was $32,000 a year. So we keep cranking out these opioids and then shout out of the other side of our mouths that, well, we have an opioid crisis. Well, yeah, you created that. Yeah. So clearly we need more government to create it. I tell people all the time, we are already living in a post-constitutional society. We have been for over 100 years. easily. In fact, the barriers, the restraints were cast aside before. I say it all the time. The ink was even dry on the holy parchment. So let's just acknowledge that and find ways to live peacefully rather than embracing, as much as people complain about the system we're under right now, they cling to it. They cling to their chains, these cold, cruel, harsh chains people somehow find comforting. I'm thinking right now, remember I was taking psychology classes in UCLA. I found them interesting. And there was this experiment with a little monkey, and he would eschew how they would choose the comfort, and then there was one over food, and you just see them behaving in ways that were in contravention to purposes of their own survival. Also learned helplessness. They had a puppy in a cage with a wire bottom, and they would keep shocking the puppy, and then they would give them a part that was insulated so they could escape from the shock. By the time they gave the puppy this option to escape from the shocks, it was so demoralized. It just stood there and took it. And that's what we're doing right now. We are taking it and taking it and taking it. Every new tax, every new regulation, every time something comes along. We had a populist candidate that scratched and clawed his way to the top from 17 and said, I'm going to get us out of these wars. I'm going to put America first. I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to do all these things. And he also started criticizing the Federal Reserve. He's paid lip service to it and said, but nothing else, nothing really substantive. If he was really going to go gung-ho for what we were hoping for, the Federal Reserve would have been suffering a full frontal assault right now. What's happened to those, Greg? You probably know more about this than I do, but others have challenged gold standards, fiat currency in other countries and in this country and not fared well from it. Do you think these people are just afraid? Do you think somebody maybe got to him and said, you better back off this, amigo?
Well, that's what happened with Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. Hussein tried to get off the U.S. standard fiat currency, and Gaddafi tried to implement an African-wide gold standard and break away again from the U.S. based fiat currency. I don't think that anybody's going to be successful breaking away from this Federal Reserve system and setting up a gold standard type of a currency in any way in the realistic future, because the economic system itself actually depends upon the fluctuation and the variability of fiat currency. You might have the belief that you don't have depressions and recessions like we had back with like the Panic of 1908 and the recession of 1896 and all the other ones that came along, but we still have the same thing. And that's what we were told that the Federal Reserve was supposed to do for us. And of course, it didn't do that at all. It just changed the frequency and duration of these depressions and recessions, and also limited our prosperity, because if you take away the floor and remove that dropout, you remove the opportunity for other people to accelerate much past where they're just average citizens. They can't become the next billionaires. That's going to have to come from a different sector now, because you've taken it out of the small business marketing area where it used to be. So can it happen? It can happen, but I think that you're going to find a lot of dead bodies along the way, trying to establish a gold or a platinum standard of any kind anywhere right now.
By the way, it was our Republican President Nixon that took us off the gold standard, if I'm not mistaken.
FDR confiscated everybody's gold. Yes,
and that's what we mentioned yesterday with this repository in Texas. What makes me suspicious is what if the feds say, we're going to come in and confiscate this gold that is in there, because we've got nothing in Fort Knox. We're just going to put it over. We're going to put it over there. But the indoctrination again and the misinformation. This goes back to again Texas v. White when we talk about seceding from this government, you have to also understand I was accused on K-Talk of wanting to ruin the country. That is only if you cannot distinguish the people that live here from this government. Are we so superficial and pointless that our sole existence is dependent upon the megalomaniacs in Washington, D.C.? If we were to get away from them, and I'm in my RV driving across this continental landmass, are the people going to vanish because they're not controlled by Washington, D.C.? No, they're really not. And this goes back again to Texas versus White. It's quoted all the time. The Supreme Court's already weighed in on this. That is, again, when you allow an opinion, and Salmon Chase, that's what makes this such a notorious case as well. A Lincoln appointee, surprise, surprise, is saying secession is illegal. So Texas versus White overrules the premise that secession was legal. They say no, states cannot secede unless, I guess, you can go through the other states, give them permission. I tell people this all the time. Look, at the time the Constitution was being debated and ratified, 3 states reserved the right to leave should this government no longer suit their purposes, or should they just decide to leave for whatever purpose. That was New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia. That was accepted. That term was accepted and therefore applied to all of them. Absent a constitutional amendment pursuant to Article 5, secession, that term has never been changed. The Supreme Court does not take the place of an Article 5 convention. And we see this all the time. Now, our good friend Andrew listens to the show, and we've got some great listeners trying to spread our messages out. And he puts forth a question to his people, his followers, this one with regard to the legislative branch. The original legislative branch, national socialized medicine, is illegitimate. It's congressional tyranny. What other illegitimate federal acts can you name? Well, we're an hour and 37 minutes into a 2-hour show, and we could spend the rest of the week going over that. But you know what? Just think about your daily lives. I mentioned my dog wormer and the veterinarian out here in the middle of nowhere in Utah, and the federal government has reached in and interfered with my desire to work with them in a manner which we both found agreeable. What do they not control? Let me also refer you, we've talked about this before, to the American Community Survey. They want to know everything about what you live, and this comes at you from the Census Bureau. They have a constitutional authority to know how many people are in your house, how many people are living with you for the purpose of census and representative and representation in the House. They don't have a constitutional authority to know how I'm heating my house, who stayed here for more than 3 days, can I dress myself, how many toilets I have. They don't have but they insist that they know. And if you don't give them that information, you are subject to penalty under a federal statute. This is insane, and there's no reason we should be living under this.
See, I was threatened 4 times after I refused to fill out the information. And there was a section in there for people living in your house, and I put in child. And they called me, and I didn't. And there was a notes section after that. I said, everything that follows, you either already have or you have access to. Please don't bother me anymore. I'm busy. And I got the first call. It started out very pleasantly. Hi, we noticed that you turned it in. Thank you so much for turning in your survey. Apparently, you didn't read all the instructions because the other 92 pages you forgot to fill out. And I said, oh, no, I didn't forget to fill out. You have that information. And she said, well, no, we don't, sir. I said, yes, you do. I used to work at NSA. You have that information. She says, but we don't share information like that. I said, sure,
oh, no.
Sure you don't. Let me correct you. Yes, you do. Well, she said, oh, no, sir, we don't do that here at all. So that one went with me telling them I wasn't going to. Next, I got the supervisor, and I thought he was really cool dude. He was like, Mr. Carpenter, I believe you haven't filled out the all the blocks here. I said, I believe you don't have the constitutional authority to make me. So, you know, and how are you, by the way? Did you fill out your survey? He said, well, I didn't get one. I said, of course you didn't.
Surprise, surprise.
And it went downhill from there, you know. It came with them threatening and reading the statute to me, telling me that I could get 10 years or $10,000 fine for not cooperating with them in their data collection. And I said, yeah, you haven't prosecuted anybody in almost 50 years on that statute. Because if you tried to, you'd lose. So you're not going to prosecute me. But I appreciate your interest in my life and your effort in collecting everything about me that you already have. Have a nice day. And that was the last I heard from them.
And yeah, well, I called. They have an 800 number to assist you if you have questions. So my question was along the lines of yours. Where is the constitutional authority to make this demand of cites the federal statute? And I said, no, federal statute is not constitutional authority, particularly when the statute itself is outside the purview of the Constitution. Show me where it is in the Constitution. I'll be happy to answer these questions. I'll give you a hint. Look under Article 1, Section 8. She says, oh, it's not there, so we can. This is a government employee, and they're under the interpretation, the impression that anything that it doesn't say we can't do, we can do. And the unfortunate thing is this is not an uncommon interpretation of the Constitution. They think that it is essentially a document that once created pretty much granted the general government anything they wanted to under the doctrine of implied powers. And that's what we're living under today. And now we know they don't even care, implied or not. They're going to do it anyway. I don't care if it is controlled substances. I don't care if it is the Environment, Migratory Birds Act, going on through the list. Where is the authority for this? Well, the states are not capable of doing this themselves. Says who? Says who?
So let me go back one step, because I think you said something earlier, Suzanne, that really has incredible bearing on this. Who wants that information? Well, as usual, it's one group of people that want that information, called government, for the purposes of the highfalutin purposes of representation. Well, how well has that representing been doing lately? In fact, for 230 years. Guys, this is where we have to have a paradigm shift. In my government, remember I talked about my minarchist night watchman approach? Guess what is absent in my government? A legislature of any type. I would never, ever, ever empower a legislature ever again, because we've seen what legislatures do. They work behind closed doors. They bring in experts to explain why we need all this data. And then they take votes and they decide by statute, Greg Carpenter. I don't know why I keep saying Rick. Oh, I got a friend of mine, Rick Carpenter. That's why you look like him, actually. Greg Carpenter. That's why you will answer under penalty of law the information we want you to give us. Why? Because of those megalomaniac sociopaths in Congress, in the legislature, who believe it's within their purview to create a statute. Who cares? I don't care if it's constitutional or not. It doesn't matter. It matters that they want this information under the auspices of we need to make sure we have equal representation. Guys, that's a total smokescreen to get you to come under their control. And guess what? We all fall for it.
Yeah. And, you know, Mark, when I asked this also, it's not even for representation anymore. She said, we want to make your community better. Yeah. We want to know if you need hospitals, more police, better schools, better roads. Just want to make my community better? Get out of it. Just leave us alone. But everybody looks to the federal funding. You know, we send this money up to the megalomaniacs. It gets laundered and we get pennies back on the dollar. And that was the problem with the Medicaid, the commingling of these state and federal funds. And oftentimes states come up with these policies and other states have to pay for it. This is why California seceding would be the best thing that could happen for us. Yes, we have opposing views philosophically and how we should have our lives run, how we should be governed, but they still, what we have in common is the right to self-governance, particularly when they say this is about representation. We know, we covered this earlier, Mark, they don't represent us. Go ahead, Greg.
Suzanne, do you think that Shea was going to ask the federal government to help his local community back during Shea's rebellion?
No.
Do you think that he was asking them for help, or he was more angry with them? Did he want them to make his community better, or did he want them just to go the hell home?
And what did John Taylor of Caroline prognosticate? Beware the unholy alliance between government and finance. And wasn't that really the premise of the Shays Rebellion? What happened?
That's bottom line. Yeah.
Well, and it comes back to this constant and one that only scale can solve, only scale, this country-county debate that has been raging for thousands of years. The difference between the rural and the city. And the only way that gets resolved is by scale. Because when the city governs, you end up with Shays Rebellion. You end up with the farmer saying, I've had enough of this. Get the guns. We're going to go fix this. Well, if Massachusetts really had just had proper scale and the debtors in Boston weren't trying to jack the farmers out there supplying the food, and the farmers were self-governing out there, you wouldn't have had many of these problems. The megalomaniacs like consolidating power. They just do. That's their MO. And they've been there since the very beginning. I mean, does anybody think Hamilton was a straight shooting guy? Does we think he had all the marbles going in the right direction there in his head? No. I think there's a lot we have to understand about human nature as it applies to government, and understand that there is always this subset of people. I don't care in a country of 320 million people, it only has to be like what, Greg, 0.001% of the population that are sociopaths and have political ambition.
That's it.
That's about all it takes.
That's all you need.
It doesn't have to be.
And boom, Stalin is back.
Because most of us go to 7-Eleven and buy coffee. We go to work. We plan our vacations. We just want to be left alone. And guess who won't leave us alone? You know, in a weird way, I hate to even go in this direction because it just sickens me to even think about it. But this whole thing with General Flynn getting convicted of, lying to the FBI. So right. What? So what? That's all.
They all lie.
Well, this is it. This is selective prosecution. So it's generally called a process crime because the FBI is an antagonistic organization against the people. And so the people do what naturally you do when you're getting your head beat in. You try to stay away from the hammer. You know the hammer's coming. You don't just say, "Oh, keep hitting me, keep hitting me." No, you lie to them because you know they're lying. And so this fraudulent, evil government is lied to by a guy who dedicated his entire life to defending the country, and now he's going to jail. And some idiot judge talks about treason. Well, the guy lost everything. Now, I'm not a Flynn fan. I actually was very opposed to him when it was the idea of him being the vice president for Trump, candidate for Trump, was floated out there. I'm very opposed to the guy ideologically. But let's be honest here. This is sick. This is sick. Why did he get in trouble for lying to the FBI when the FBI's lying to him constantly
to try to get him to say something that's going to cough up information that never happened? Now, how does that become a crime? That's a bunch of hooky.
And Greg,
that's what the Migratory Bird Act of 1913 tried to prevent, is more goose shit in Washington.
and Greg, then you know what they do? They hide behind that statue outside of the Supreme Court with Lady Justice supposedly balancing the scales. There's no balanced justice here, folks. You are being ruled And Mike Flynn is demonstrating what happens to you when you get crosswise with these megalomaniacs. You better learn how to get away from this group. That's why Jefferson wrote very clearly, you have three options when you come up against this stuff. You either alter it, good luck. You abolish it, good luck part two, or you get away from it. That's it. Those are your options. And
he was a 3-star general.
yeah,
He was in charge of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Yeah. Yeah.
No flake. He's no flunky.
No.
Look,
You know.
he had the weaponization of the Internal Revenue Service
Oh,
used against conservative groups. Lois Lerner goes up there, takes the fifth, case closed. We've moved on.
right.
We know that this government will use its might against those who are trying to illuminate their evil nature.
Yep.
And
I tell people all the time, if you don't see me tomorrow at work, start looking on milk containers. I'm going to be on a milk carton someday, very soon.
Yeah.
these people violate the law with impunity. But if we go astray and make a little mistake, oh my goodness, we are going to have to pay the price.
Yeah.
And we tolerate this. We are threatened under penalty of federal law. And this is, but again, here's what henceforth, this is my advice. If you are ever questioned by any member of any federal agency, you just tell them, what difference at this point does it make?
And I was reading an article just the other day, and it said every day, every citizen in this union commits 4 federal felonies every day. And if you drive, went on to say you commit 8.
Jeez. Well,
I don't like to be an underachiever.
I'm going for 16 today.
You can do a lot more with the radar detector. I'm just saying.
There's so many federal regulations. They don't even know what the laws are. So they don't even know you're committing the crime until they finally figure it out. And then we're all criminals anyway, and they can do whatever they want to us.
And
There's
folks,
that book, 3 Felonies a Day. I'm gonna get that out and have some stuff prepared to talk about that. But and this is the problem with people sitting around, that being a legislature becomes their full-time job. How many, even at the county, city levels, do you have people where making law is their full-time job?
right.
Clearly, they have to do something. They can't all just say, nope, we're going to get rid of this law. We're going to get rid of this law. We're going to get rid of this law. Where do you draw the line? I came across an article that said, we can't get too much into it, but DC was closing down a play group that was in a church. It had been operating for 20 years. Well, they said it was really acting more like a daycare center. And you kind of think, well, if you are operating a daycare center, should there be some rules? Where do we draw the line? My point is, this should be for people to come up with on their own.
Yes.
And solve these problems. Look, as a group of parents, that we're going to come together and have a co-op for watching each other's kids. Here are some basic rules. Because these people came up with basic rules on behalf of the children's safety, DC could not stand that. So no, we got to get involved, because clearly you're not capable of coming up with means by which to keep your children safe on your own. So this isn't something just at a national, pardon my French, level. Tyranny and this nanny mentality is something that we have to educate people on the proper role of government, self-reliance, and stop looking towards others to making these decisions for us.
Wait, you just said something that just confused me a little bit here, and I know I'm easily confused being a college graduate, but I'm not competent enough to do pretty much anything on my own, right?
Right.
I want to make sure I understood that.
No,
Okay.
of course not.
So
No.
if I'm not competent enough to do anything on my own, why would you trust me to vote?
Well, so you can legitimize us telling you that you're not competent to do anything on your own.
And if you're dumb enough and incompetent, keep
You
the
do
right
it.
party in power, and you'll keep looking towards the government for more solutions to government-created problems. The other thing too, and I wish we could have spent more time on this, but one of the big things in the news right now is Donald Trump finally saying we're getting the troops out of Syria, but he's doing it on the premise that ISIS is defeated. And I just wanted to include this in the show because he's not doing this on the premise that, hey, we never should have been there in the first place. ISIS is defeated, which is going to open the road towards either another false flag event, a sarin gas attack, or some other terrorist. Oh, ISIS is still around. We're going to keep the troops over there. I think it's kind of a distraction from the bump stock ban. That's just my theory.
No, it's in reality, it's a bargain that he struck with the Democrats in order to avoid prosecution.
Could be. Well, folks, brings us right back to some fundamental questions as we close up the show here. Do you want to live under that kind of government? Now, you may actually want to. Well, and that's fine. Just go do it in a small republic somewhere where it's not affecting me. Yes. I don't want to live in that kind of government. I think this is a highly immoral, evil government we live under right now. I think it must come to an end somehow or get away from it. You pull 14 states away from this government and that government comes to an end. It will not survive something like that. It would hardly survive California leaving on its own. But folks, I hope you're as sick as we are of living under this. I don't like living under a fear that some sociopath bureaucrat can destroy my life if I don't comply with such. Greg, they could have destroyed your life. A $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in prison because you wouldn't comply with information. Do you think that can anybody possibly defend that as a moral government? And of course,
I think that's
can't.
fair. Sure it is.
Sure it is. Yeah.
And they threaten to do so. They say, we will send you a postcard to remind you to fill out this form. If you don't, we'll call you, or we might send somebody to your house to assist you. Well, define assist. Are they
How much money did they spend on that too, by the way?
Exactly. Are they going to hold a gun to your head? What if you refuse to let them in the house? Are they going to call in more feds or the local SO to come and arrest you? Is the SO going to stand up for you? That's another problem we're having. State law enforcement that is getting all these federal funds, thanks to the war on drugs, are part and parcel now of one big federal criminal justice law enforcement system. That's
that human rights risks right now. United States turned yellow for the first time ever.
Wow.
We're not the number one country in the world anymore for protecting your human rights. Congratulations.
No. I'm telling you,
into the quagmire.
I don't know how we could even consider ourselves a candidate for human rights. 60 million plus babies dead and counting. I don't think we get to make any claim for
we left the Human Rights Commission because we're better than everybody else, right?
Yeah,
we think that. So, folks, you got to change your thinking on this. You got to join the movement. You got to begin to make these kinds of arguments to your friends and family. You got to play your part. This is not the Mark, Suzanne, and Greg's responsibility. We play a part. We play the role of trying to open up ideas and proffer ideas. But ultimately, it's going to take millions of us. And I believe the appetite is there. Right now, we're lacking leadership. I think as leadership continues to emerge, and it is, we're going to see some remarkable things. I hope I live long enough to see it. But if I don't, I sure hope my kids and grandkids are able to see this, because I don't like this government. I don't want to live under it. It is evil. It can kill me. It can crush me. Some bureaucrat with a pen could destroy my life at any given moment. And folks, that's not freedom. That's just slavery without being killed yet. I don't want to be a slave anymore. I hope you don't.
Any more thoughts, Greg and Jeff, before we wrap up the show?
I'll sneak a second. Folks, if you're just tuning in for the first time and if you've never heard Mark Kreslin's talk before, I would tell you that you're listening to Radio Gold. I've listened to this man for years. And he invited me on after a long time of listening to me banter on my own. And
that was fun.
I appreciate the opportunity, but folks, you got to hear, listen, go back, listen to the previous broadcasts of what's in this man's head. It makes a lot of sense. Suzanne, the lawyer that offers up free advice, what's better than that? A lawyer with free advice.
But, folks, this will probably be our last broadcast before Christmas, so I want to wish everybody a very blessed Christmas. And I hope everybody has a very happy and safe New Year. And we're going to pursue what we're doing here. We know it's the right thing to do. We know human decency is on our side. This is not just a Christian movement, folks. There are atheists behind us. We have a common enemy, and that is the enemy in Washington, D.C., the tyranny our founders went to so much trouble for us to avoid. We need to stop fighting one another, join forces, face the common enemy. That way, regardless of what your political, social, moral views are, we can all live under a system to which we have consented. I want to thank you all for joining me today. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mark. Mark and Suzanne Show, revolutionizing radio on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thank you for listening. God bless you.
Hail Marcus.